expired. Honourable Craig Foss.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I support and endorse the motion from our very good Prime Minister, Mr John Key, that this House express its confidence in the National-led government and commend its programme for 2014 as set out in the Prime Minister's statement, Mr Speaker. We will continue our hard, disciplined but transparent work as we build a much brighter future for our wonderful, wonderful country. Mr Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition, David Cunliffe, he's an invisible man leading an invisible party, spending invisible money on invisible problems due to some invisible crisis, which will inevitably lead them to invisible poll results. Invisible money being spent on invisible problems due to some invisible crisis. How often have we heard, Mr Speaker, manufacturing crisis, economic crisis, fiscal crisis, education crisis, ECE crisis, I heard the other day, for goodness sake, from the Leader of the Opposition. Mr Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition's very bad start to this year and his leadership continues. I believe his polling results are still under the previous leader, Mr Shearer, who have not yet reached his dizzying heights of about 13 or 14%, I understand. We'll wait and see over the coming weeks, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, Labour's big announcement, David Cunliffe's tricky announcement the other day, is continuing to unravel. Absolutely tricky. His bad start continues. He left New Zealand with the impression he sold a policy that said New Zealanders, regardless of who they were, where they were, as long as they were under 150k of income, but now that's unsure if it's a single or a double income, he left the impression that every child born to every family would achieve $60 for the first year of that child's life. In no uncertain terms, he told New Zealand that, he told the gathering in Auckland that, and he told the media that again and again and again, Mr Speaker. Well, Patrick Gower has called that quite dishonest, deceptive and dishonest, because they were left with the impression, and Labour knew that was the impression they tried to gave out, and no one corrected it. No one corrected them until they were found out, because the fine print was read, Mr Speaker. The tricky policy was unravelled, continues to unravel, as the fine print was read. I imagine David Cunliffe is now kicking himself and furiously trying to backpedal, knowing he should have understood that policy, he should have understood the details, or he should have read his very own fine print when the policy was released. Because I know Mr Cunliffe is very interested in fine print. To quote Mr Cunliffe, because this in fact is what's happening right now under this national government, as we unravel and discover what's in the fine print of Labour's policy. This is what Mr Cunliffe said in this House a couple of years ago. This debate to uncover some of the hidden traps, the fine print, and the places where the gloss is not as good as people were led to believe. That is what the current Leader of the Opposition said a couple of years ago in this House. Well, that can apply to this exact policy, which, if it was applied under the Fair Trading Act or advertising, would be misleading, would be deceptive, and probably someone would be held up before the courts. Mr Speaker, our Prime Minister John Key continues to lead the national-led government and our coalition friends and partners through tough times in New Zealand. But we continue to work for all New Zealanders, regardless of where they come from, regardless of their parentage, regardless of the definition of their family, regardless of how their parent or birth parents ended up, regardless of the state of their caregivers. We govern and work every day for all of New Zealanders, all the time, regardless of where they come. We don't grab the short-term highlights or whatever. We make every decision for the medium, long-term betterment for this wonderful, wonderful country. We are open. We're transparent. We will lay out our policies before the electorate, as we did last time. There won't be any fine print. There won't be any hidden details. our leaders, our cabinet understand their policies, our policies, which lead this country to a position where we are so much stronger than we were, albeit just 5 years ago. We will continue, Mr. Speaker, the hard work, the discipline, making some tough calls. You've got to do that in government, and you have to do that even more so in an environment around the world where there's been a global financial crisis, where we came into government and New Zealand had been in recession for a couple of years, where our export sector had been collapsing since 2005, Mr. Speaker, for an exporting nation. That is tragic, Mr. Speaker. We'll continue our prudential management of our Crown accounts, of the taxpayers' balance sheet, while maintaining our dedication to betterment of social services, leading, Mr. Speaker, to deliver upon what we have said, where every New Zealander, regardless of who, where, why they came into the world, has an opportunity to realise their awesome potential for our awesome country, regardless. And if they trip up along the way, our social conscience and our social help will be there to assist them. That is who we are, Mr. Speaker. But that must be balanced with our economy, with our social conscience, and of course with our environmental aspirations. There will be no tricky, nonsense, silly details, stuff hidden in the fine print, way down in the bottom somewhere, hoping no one will notice until after the election, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have had a first 5 years which have been quite challenging. The Christchurch, Canterbury earthquakes, the tragedies around those, socially, in a human sense, and of course economically, Mr. Speaker. We have had an export crisis, which we inherited, as I spoke to earlier, Mr. Speaker. But we've got through. We've got through. We have built a platform where New Zealand can begin to fly. The platform for growth for a better New Zealand, even better than we have now, is ready and waiting. We cannot put it all at risk, Mr. Speaker. We cannot put it all at risk, because just as the global financial crisis is starting to really step away, just as Europe, the States, Japan, Asia are starting to come right out of the global financial crisis, we can't put it all at risk with silly things such as invisible spending, invisible money, making our country more vulnerable to global waxes and wanes around the world. Just, Mr. Speaker, as confidence in New Zealand reaches a higher level than it's been for many, many, many years, which means hiring one more person, means investing in our country, Mr. Speaker, we cannot put it all at risk, because the policies articulated and the track record of a Labour, Greens, far-left government, Mr. Speaker, will be tragic for New Zealand, because it puts every single hard call over the last 5 years at risk, just as things are coming right, Mr. Speaker, not only for New Zealand, for the world. Mr. Speaker, we cannot put it all at risk. We are just about to reach surplus in 2014-15. We cannot put it all at risk with printing machines, invisible money and uncosted spending promises to try and grab electorate gain. Mr. Speaker, we cannot put our awesome crime statistics, decline in crime statistics at risk, Mr. Speaker, because policies of the Labour-Green coalition over there, if they were ever to get in government, Mr. Speaker, they'll continue the old policies, forgetting about victims and doing catch and release policies as we inherited from them in 2008, Mr. Speaker. We cannot put our health gains at risk, Mr. Speaker, just as we are now gaining 40,000 extra elective operations every year. A Labour-Greens government would put it all at risk. They would put it all at risk, because every time they question it, we go back to where they were with people lying in corridors, bleeding into buckets, Mr. Speaker. We cannot put at risk, Mr. Speaker, 3.5% growth in New Zealand, 3.5% growth, some of the best growth in the developed world, with the Labour and Greens policies, Mr. Speaker. We cannot do that. We cannot put at risk the progress we've made in treaty settlements as they would. We cannot put at risk the gains in after-tax wages, Mr. Speaker, if a Labour and Greens government was ever to come about. And of course, Mr. Speaker, finally, we cannot put the gains of internet and ICT investment at risk in New Zealand, Mr. Speaker, by crazy, silly policies such as trying to ban Facebook, ban Google, or whatever Labour's trying to do over there. Just ban it and that'll fix it. Mr. Speaker, this is a serious, serious game. New Zealand has turned the corner. We're about to take off, Mr. Speaker. The platform for growth and a much brighter future has been built. We must be able to continue the work. We cannot put it all at risk with a far-left Labour-Greens government, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I call the honourable